How many people can teach you ancient Hebrew? How many courses are available?
Oh, you can take it at any graduate college.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And is it, it's not something that we know what it sounded like, correct?
Realistically, yeah, we don't really know how most of the things are pronounced with anything.
But isn't that very bizarre when you're translate? Like if you go back to, like, say, the Epic of Gilgamesh, we don't even know what the words sounded like.
Yeah.
We kind of know what they represent, and then we do a literal translation of what they represent. But if you've never heard, no one can speak ancient Sumerian.
How do scholars decipher ancient languages? Before answering this question, it is helpful first to think about what it means to decipher any language. The foundation of language is to connect sounds with meaning. Typically, writing systems are comprised of symbols that represent sounds. So the first step to figuring out a writing system would be to figure out which sounds are represented by the symbols. This is how we all learn to read. If we can determine the sounds of a writing system, then we can pronounce the words. But this does not give us the ability to understand what we can pronounce. We still need some way to connect the sounds to meanings, in the same way that the original speakers connected those two things. So, I point all this out to begin with to say that Rogan is understandably skeptical about this process. We don't have access to speakers of these ancient languages anymore. So, how could we possibly connect sounds to the meanings that the ancient speakers of these languages actually had in their heads? And how do we even connect these symbols to the sounds themselves? The basic answer to this question is that scholars have used ancient multilingual transliterations and translations to decipher new scripts and languages. So as we go through this, I will talk about the difference between a transliteration and a translation. To illustrate the point, we can use Origen's hexapla. Origen was a 3rd century Christian scholar who took a massive amount of time to do all of us modern day scholars a huge favor. He transliterated and compiled translations of the Hebrew Bible into Greek. Let's see how this works to illustrate how scholars have deciphered ancient languages. In Genesis 3:24, there is a Hebrew word with letters that look like the following. Now, I and many others know how to read this, but let's pretend for a second that no one knows either the meaning or pronunciation of this string of characters. How could we possibly figure out how to read it? Texts like Origen's hexapla give us the key. He transliterated these characters into Greek. Crucially, transliteration is not a translation. To transliterate means to take the sounds of one language and put them into another language's script. Origen transliterates the Hebrew word into the following Greek letters, which would spell out cheruvim or vim. Now, if you know Greek, you can start to make hypotheses about the sounds being made by the Hebrew letters. For example, the Hebrew word starts with the letter kaf, like a backwards C, and this corresponds to the first letter in the Greek word, which is chi. We can do the same for the other letters in other words that are transliterated, particularly names, until we can figure out solid evidence for all of the Hebrew letters and how they would have sounded based on the Greek representations of those letters. In fact, this particular word is transliterated into English as well. So even our English reflects a similar sound to the Hebrew. The word is cherubim, which in Hebrew is pronounced keruvim. So with transliterations, we can decipher what ancient languages sounded like. However, we are still left with the crucial problem of figuring out what all those symbols mean. This is where translations come in. What is great about Origen's hexapla is that he also gives us a translation. In the case of a word like cherubim, Origin does not provide a separate translation besides the transliteration, showing that Greek did not have a word that accurately reflected the meaning of the Hebrew word, at least as Origin understood it. But Origin's hexapla does provide a meaning for all kinds of other words. In a nearby verse, the Hebrew name Hava is transliterated as Awa and translated as Zdoe. The Greek word Zdoe means life, which means that the Hebrew word Hava, we can hypothesize, also means life. Indeed, if we look at the other occurrences of this root in the Hebrew Bible, we would conclude that this is indeed correct. Origin also tells us that the Hebrew word tashuv means epistrepse, he will return. Again, we can check this meaning against all the other occurrences of the same Hebrew word in the Bible, and we can see if this meaning fits the context. And indeed, it does. This can be done over and over and over again for all the words in the Hebrew Bible until we can create a dictionary that would allow us to decipher all the meanings in that text and even other texts. With these two basic processes of translation and transliteration, scholars can recover both how ancient languages sounded and what they meant. In reality, Hebrew has never been a language that was incomprehensible. There have always been some people that have been able to read it. Other languages, such as those written in cuneiform, like Sumerian and Akkadian, have only been deciphered in the last few hundred years. Both of these languages were deciphered through, you guessed it, multilingual inscriptions that helped scholars determine the value of the signs we know as cuneiform. Once the code was cracked, scholars began to read more and more texts, and our knowledge of a language like Akkadian has exploded. Possibly the most well-known example of one of these multilingual inscriptions is the Rosetta Stone. It is written in 3 scripts, 2 reflecting the ancient Egyptian language and 1 in ancient Greek. Because the knowledge of Greek has never been lost, the Rosetta Stone helped scholars to crack the code of ancient Egyptian and opened up the world of ancient Egypt to us in a whole new way. So that is one example among many of how scholars, even in the recent past, have been able to decipher ancient languages. Rogan's question is a good one, but there are also good answers. We can learn what these ancient languages meant, and we can begin to learn about the people and cultures who wrote down these ancient texts.